So what we're going to do this morning is just to have a conversation about the foundation of the Oxford Centre for Maritime Archaeology. So I'm its current director, I'm Damien Robinson, and this is my colleague Frank Goddio from the European Institute of Underwater Archaeology, for which you're the president of. So Frank, could you tell us a bit about the collaboration? How did it begin? It's now 20 years, which is a long time for this sort of thing.
You're right, 20 years already. The idea was that we were performing underwater excavation, survey, topographical work. And what is important are the study of the material, the scientific publication, and also teaching and training new archaeologists, in order to have a trend, a flow of newcomers, in that field. And we thought that ideally we could have a cooperation with Oxford University and the School of Archaeology in order to perform all those tasks.
And so how did that happen then? Did you just get in touch with the university or?
Yes, with a friend of mine, she's working in Germany, had made a study in Oxford University, and she told me ideally Oxford could, I would say, fill all the gap that we had. And we get in touch with Oxford University, and it all started like that.
Mhm. So I know that you talked to my colleagues Sir Barry Cunliffe and Bert Smith and Andrew Wilson about this, and then the collaboration came together, I think, quite quickly after that with the help of the Hilti Foundation.
Yes, with Barry, Bert, Andrew, collaboration really started at once, as a matter of fact. We had a short discussion, 1 or 2 days, and then we defined the line of what could be a perfect cooperation, and we managed to finalize all paperwork, I would say, within a month, and we established Oxford Centre for Maritime Archaeology.
And now it's over 20 years later since those initial meetings. So your aim for this collaboration then was to help to train the next generation of maritime archaeologists, or at least introduce people to the subject, and then also to think about publications, conferences, fieldwork, those sorts of things. How do you think that has gone?
Well, I have to say that it went better than even I thought at the beginning, because idea was also to have a kind of a reservoir of expertise in order to study all artifacts and all data that we were gathering on site. But I thought most probably we will not fill all the gap. And it so happens that yes, everything from weaponry for the 4th century BC to Hellenistic architecture, there is everything there, in Oxford, which is a kind of a dream.
Mhm.
And also the cooperation, teaching and training new students, and performing symposia, conferences went very, very well. And it's very active, and I love that.
I certainly think that's one of the great one of the great things that we've done is to kind of broaden out what the research is about, and to bring in lots of Oxford scholars into it. So last night we were talking to one of our colleagues who studies the coins from your excavations, which is giving us really interesting new insights into the kind of the use of coinage in Egypt at that time.
Yes, its subject can be studied in depth, and what is very important also is our scientific publications.
Mhm.
This is a key thing in archaeology. And on that field, we have performed quite well, I think, during the past 20 years with monography, symposia, also renderings, and yes.
Absolutely. I think we're up to our 10th monograph, and there's at least another 10 in the works, which is a testament to the huge excavation that we're part
And
of.
a lot of art scientific articles here and there in magazines, scientific magazines. Yeah, and also what is important is bringing this to the grand public through grand public books, exhibitions, even movies, you know. And it's a very broad cooperation that we have developed together since then.
I think so. Certainly, as an academic, the opportunity to take part in these large excavations is one thing, but then being challenged to think about how we tell the story of that to a larger public audience, for me, has been one of the highlights of this cooperation.
Yeah, this point is very important because it attracts also new students and new expertise, I would say, which we come toward you and feeds the cooperation.
Well, that's definitely one of the things that I've had students that have come up to me at the end of lectures that say, I chose to come here specifically because I went to an exhibition at the British Museum or when they were in America, and that inspired me to think about underwater archaeology. So I think that's an absolutely fantastic testament to how we reach out to people. Now, the thing is, the Hilty Foundation then provides funding for our students to work on bodies of material, which then feed into your publications. And the publications all come out of the School of Archaeology as well. So this excavation through post-excavation to publication cycle, I think is really important. And it's one of the great features of the collaboration that we've got.
I think it's a key issue. It's a key issue because, of course, it's bringing knowledge as a result of the excavation to historian and to the grand public, but also it's preparing the future for future excavation in those sites or elsewhere in the world, thanks to new underwater archaeologists, young archaeologists coming into the field.
I think that's one of the great things for us and for our students is that the scale of the excavations in Tonis Herakleion and Canopus and Alexandria are so huge, and the number of artifacts that are coming from it are so pristine and important because of the catastrophic destruction of some of the aspects of it, that we get a chance to look at material that we would never otherwise see. So things that are unique, things that are wonderful. And so for us, it's a privilege and a challenge, which is what you go into academia for, I think.
Yeah, it's a true challenge, I have to say, because we are talking about whole cities. You know, Tonis Herakleion was a port of entry to Egypt, was a great port, a large port. Had also very important sanctuaries, the military garrison in order to control the entrance to Egypt, and all that are different aspects of ancient life: military, religious, daily life, and navigation. In port basin, we discover more than 100 ancient shipwrecks that each of them could be excavated, studies. As we have few centuries of work ahead of us in our cooperation.
So 20 years is only just the beginning then?
Yes, it's just a start.
Frank, when the collaboration between OCMA and the European Institute for Underwater Archaeology and the Hilty Foundation started 20 years ago now, you'd already found the lost city of Tonis Herakleion, you'd already found Canopus and the royal quarters in Alexandria. One of the things that has amazed me is how you keep the research going on and how you continually come up with new questions. And how do you do that?
Yeah, the more we work on those sites, the more we understand that we can go much deeper in the knowledge of those sites. at the beginning, you are performing topographical surveys. Thus, you have to discover the site. Then, after, you have to draw the layout of those sites, the map, I would say, of the site of those cities with their port basin, temples, main monuments, etc. Then after, you have to excavate, you know, in order to try to identify the main monument, to identify shipwrecks, and excavating it, of course, you go deeper in the knowledge of those sites. And to take an example as for a temple, for example, once you have discovered, you have drawn the layout of that temple, you will start excavation in order to identify it. And then when you have identified that sanctuary, you have to go even deeper, and the excavation will reveal how those sanctuaries were, I would say, living. What were the ceremony performed in there? For example, in the temple of Amon-Gereb, we went very deep in the knowledge of the celebration of the mysteries of Osiris, which was something very, very, very little known before, and we can go in depth into that. Mm-hmm. Thus, the questions are raised years after year, and new problematics comes to you.
Oh. So that's really a testament to the long-term foundation that the Hilti Foundation have enabled with their continual support over this time. So lots of continual funding enables you to approach the site in a way that is almost unique, I think, in archaeology, with that long-term view. Let's start with the detailed topography, and then let's get into the more interesting questions. Because I think where we are now is at a stage where we're saying, okay, we know perhaps where the main temples are, but now let's think about life in this city. And that's it's becoming more fascinating as time goes on.
Mm-hmm. I think it's of a prime importance, this long-term cooperation with the Hilti Foundation, because it enables you to draw historical issues and to define long-term work on some historical issues. And you are not put forward a discovery by chance on something. Mm-hmm. You know that you have to discover that, and then you have to go in depth. How those temples were functioning, what was the people praying there. Thus you go very much into detail, and you even enter to the soul of the people, you know, how they were thinking, how they were praying, what were they believing. You know?
And certainly, so if we think about, say, one of the temples that you've worked on, so there's the Temple of Khonsu-Tot, which was a very early foundation in Tanis Herakleion, but only has a very short lifespan. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yes, it's a very strange temple. Tanis Herakleion was a gate of Egypt. Thus, there was a garrison controlling the entrance to Egypt. But a military garrison was something, but not enough. For the people of that time, it was very important to have a sanctuary of the god which is watching the gate of Egypt and protecting Egypt from invasion. And this is why we knew most probably there would be somewhere a temple to Khonsu-Tot, and we found it dating back from the end of 8 to 7, and ending its activity by the 6th century BC. And most probably that activity stopped because of change in the Nile direction, branch direction, and most probably that sanctuary was no longer well oriented compared to the Nile flood, and it had to be rebuilt somewhere else, and etc.
Yeah. So one of the things that amazes me about that temple is the very careful way that it was taken apart, piece by piece, presumably so that the temple could be recycled somewhere else in its rebuilding again. But how then the rise in sea level forced the complete abandonment of that site.
Yes, and the sailing, I would say, everything was sealed, and which was good for us, and 2 or 3 meters of sediment, and the few things that they forgot to take away were very, very instructive. We could have on bronze plate the name of the god, the identity of that temple, and a few artifacts, few coffin of oaks or ibis, which was, of course, confirming the identity of that temple. It was very interesting. And it's a kind of disappearance, but we have another kind of ending activity of temples in Tunis Heraklion by earthquake. And tsunami and total destruction with landslide in a question of a second. This was the case of the main temple of Tunis Heraklion, the temple of Amongereb. And it's a kind of a dream for underwater archaeologists, is that temple more or less slid into a channel and filled the whole channel which was flooding to the south of the temple. And we are discovering here the whole temple destroyed, of course, but it's a giant puzzle that we have to reconstruct.
Absolutely, and that's one of the great things about such a long-term project is that you can have multiple year-long campaigns on on excavating and then reconstructing the destruction horizons from this point. So this period that you're talking about is the final phase, more or less, in Tunis Heraklion, which is completely destroyed by earthquakes, by tsunamis, and you feel that destruction horizon, that catastrophe, it's what archaeologists dream about finding, isn't it? It's a terrible event, but it has an enormous potential for us to understand the life of the city at that point.
Of course, it was unfortunate for the people of that time, but like in Pompeii, we have there an underwater Pompeii, which has not been destroyed by volcano, but by tsunamis, landslide, and total submersion under the sea.
The sites of Tunis Heraklion, you've probably looked at about 2 to 5% of it. There's so much more for hundreds more years of work.
I think since now 10 years, I say we have not excavated more than 5% of the site of Tunis Heraklion, but unfortunately, every year we found out that there is even more than what we thought, and I have to decrease that percentage every year from now on.
So what really we're doing is laying the foundations for future archaeologists, both future archaeologists through their education, but also future archaeologists to do their field work in these amazing sites in Egypt.
You're right. We are, I think, paving the way for future archaeologists on those sites. And this is why also when we start excavation on a particular site, we never fully excavated that site. Because when you are performing an excavation, you are doing perturbation, of course. And you are doing it with the best knowledge and the best technique of your time, But you have to understand, you have to know that within years or century maybe, the techniques will be much more sophisticated, much more elaborated. Thus, you have always to let to future archaeologists samples of that they could work on with the new techniques and future technology.
Absolutely.
I think it's very important. I compare archaeology a little bit like surgery, you know. Before the X-ray and the technology we have today, surgeons had to open in order to see what was happening in that part of the body without prior knowledge. Now you have IRM, you have Doppler, you have scanner, you have X-ray, and you have a pre-knowledge of what you will find, and you will define exactly where you have to do the surgery. Exactly the same in underwater archaeology. The more you can have prior knowledge of the site without perturbating the site by new technologies that we are developing, I think the better. And let part of the site to future archaeologists in order that they could study it with the new techniques on their time.
Oh, absolutely, yes. And that's the way that you've looked at the shipwrecks, for example. Over 100 shipwrecks have been discovered in Tonnes Heraclean, and yet you've only looked at 6 of them. And so that's leaving a legacy for the future. We have a body of knowledge that we're publishing now, and on some very well excavated finds, and then for the future there's another 80, 90 wrecks.
There is a huge potential for the future, and even on some shipwreck we are not fully excavating the shipwreck, and we are always getting a small part for future studies and future technique to be applied there.
Frank, if we can now think about technology, I think is one of the great things that I've picked up from working alongside you, is that as technology changes, you've been very quick to kind of take the next step and to use the latest technology as it comes out, and also to think ahead about where we can go with various things. So one of the publications that we're working on now is on J3, which is the small rowing boat from Alexandria, from the harbour there that we found. But how did you discover it?
It was a little bit of a challenge. We have a huge quantity of sediment in Alexandria. And when we have performed a magnetometer survey with our nuclear magnetometer, which was one of their kind, everything was garbled with modern garbage everywhere. And the result of it was quite poor, though we have very extremely sophisticated nuclear resonance magnetometer. Thus, I thought, let us use another instrument, and we went to sub-bottom profiler there. Of course, after having performed a multi-beam bathymetry survey, which, okay, give you everything on the surface, but nothing inside the sediment. And it so happens that the existing sub-bottom profiler were of no use, I would say, or very little use there. Not enough accurate and not enough sensitive on that. Thus, we came up with to cooperate with a company developing a new kind of sub-bottom profiler, parametric sub-bottom profiler, which give you in 3Ds what could be in the sediment. And we performed a survey in the rural quarter of the Parthus Magnus of Alexandria. And there we gather billions of data, billions. And then come the time where we had to study those data. And it was nearly impossible, so much data there were there. Thus, I thought, let us try to use AI, you know, on this. And I defined an area where I knew perfectly what was in that area of 100 by 100 meter. And I cut it into sizes like that of 20 centimeter by 20 centimeter longitude, latitude, and 10 centimeter levels, you know. And I made the drawings of what I could see in the data. 600 drawing in latitude, 600 drawing in longitude, and 600 drawing in levels. And then I knew what was there because we had excavated there, we found a shipwreck, we found a pier, etc. Thus, I tried to develop algorithms which could see what I knew was in that area and with my drawings, you know. And it so happens that I reached 67% of accuracy. The algorithm was saying, okay, at 67%, I can see what you are telling me there is there. And I was not satisfied. Thus, I went on and the algorithm said, now 100%. 100%, but it did not work because it was, I forced the algorithm to see exactly that, and it could not work. Thus, I stay at 67%, and then I fed the algorithm with all the data we have. And you say, here I can see a shipwreck, and here I can see a shipwreck. And I look at the tiniest one, saying, yes, this one, most probably it's true. This one, yes, I think it's really true and there. But this very small one in the middle, is it true or not true? And I decided an excavation on that very little spot, 4 or 5 meter long and 1.8 meter of sediment, something strange. And it so happened that, yes, the algorithm was right. It was a small shipwreck there, GE3, that we have excavated, and also applying on that shipwreck new technology like underwater stereophotogrammetry, 3Ds, etc. And we apply also we use the new unit of wood identifications that we have created together in Alexandria, and we will now shortly publish that small shipwreck.
We will. But the idea that you can use AI now, which is really at the kind of the cutting edge of sort of scientific research in many areas, to kind of predict where shipwrecks are probably going to be in Alexandria from the data is fascinating. And then to demonstrate that by us actually excavating the smallest of them is great, because the result that has come from that is that we found a very small rowing boat that's probably a ship's boat. So these things have never been found before in the archaeological record. And traditionally, as a underwater archaeologist, you know, we would never have found it, would we? Because you would swim across the bottom of the seabed in Alexandria. There's nothing sticking out. It's 2 to 3 meters deep into the sediment. So actually having a technique that enables you to look deeper into the sediments and then find these things and excavate them is perfect. So I'm very excited about J3 and the results that have come out of it. You mentioned the work that we've done on identifying the different timbers from the ship, which is really interesting, because what it's helped to demonstrate is that this is probably a little boat that's been made in Italy and has been dragged across the Mediterranean behind a very large cargo ship going to Alexandria. So it really starts to think about those great trade routes around the Mediterranean, that Alexandria is that central hub of, especially in the east. So I think J3 is a remarkable find. But then it's only one of a whole number of remarkable finds from Alexandria.
It shows also that we are going deeper in the knowledge of the Portus Magnus, because we are finding a cargo ship, but also those small skiff of a longboat, I would say, or a very small longboat of a ship. And we are going deep into the activity of the port, how that boat was transporting a damaged anchor to be repaired, you know.
Mm-hmm.
That's, you see, okay, that boat was leaving the main cargo boat there, going to that pier, and it's interesting to see how, and it matched also the topography of the Portus Magnus, the different basin, piers, port, and you can see the life of that port, great port, coming up. You know.
Mm. And that particular ship, well, small boat, it just also gives you a very human moment of when it sinks because of your knowledge of how the port is laid out and where we found the ship, well, the boat. You can see that it was heavily overloaded with this extremely big anchor, and then it kind of is rowed out across the mouth of one of the ports, and it's clearly been hit by a big wave
Yes.
at that point and has tipped and has just sunk. And so you get that snapshot of the disaster and the picture in your mind of the people kind of swimming around and trying to get back to shore. And that's what the potential of this form of archaeology does, is it gives you that very tiny moment from the past.
Yes, and how this port was functioning, what was the life of the people there. I mean, we are finding amphora nearby that pier and of that period.
Yeah. I also want to take you to another part, not very far from J3, which is the Iseum, so the Temple of Isis, which we've spoken about the long-term nature of this. And I know you started digging the Temple of Isis. Was it in the first year of your project in the Portus Magnus?
It's a very good example. In the very first year of excavation in the Portus Magnus of Alexandria, we discover a fabulous statue of a priest holding a canopic vase, two sphinxes close by. And okay, we looked around and we saw big slabs and thought, okay, those statues have been left over and there is nothing around. And okay, we went to another place and studying. Then, thanks to this bathymetric sub-bottom profiler, after the survey, I saw that close to the site where we have found those statues, as a matter of fact, we were not on the island, but we were at the bottom of a port. And those statues were just remaining, lying on some large slabs, which has went down to the slope during the destruction of the temple. And it was a totally different story, because I thought that in that case, the whole temple, or part of that temple, might be at the bottom of a port. And we started to excavate nearby, and yes, as a matter of fact, most of the temple slid into the port, and we have there architectural elements, columns, ceramics, queens, treasury of the temple, and ritual instrument, everything is there. And what we thought was at the beginning 3 nice statues become now the temple to Isis, and we know the story of that temple. We know when it has been founded, who were the pharaoh who considers that temple as very important for their own cults, etc. And we are going much deeper in the history of that sanctuary.
Yeah. So who was it that founded the temple?
The foundation of the temple, I cannot say, but what I can assert is that Ptolemy XII, father of Cleopatra VII, restructured that temple in the beginning of the 1st century BC, and that temple became extremely important in 76 BC when Ptolemy XII decided to institute a cult to his own person as the new Osiris. And this was, as a matter of fact, his own temple, which was, of course, used after his death by his daughter, Cleopatra VII, who considered herself as the new Isis. It was the temple of Isis and Osiris, of course. And it was a personal temple of the queen. as well as Anthony, who considered himself as the new Dionysos, the new Osiris. Thus it was a temple of a prime importance for those times. Mm-hmm. And when Augustus took over Egypt, of course, he could not destroy that temple. He could not abandon that temple because it was so important for the clergy of Egypt, for the priest of Egypt. Thus, he converted that temple to the goddess Isis protecting the fleet, bringing the grain, the wheat from Egypt to Rome. And it was the Isis protecting the fleet, the Anon fleet, the yearly fleet to Rome. And it went functioning until an earthquake destroyed it in around 52, 55 AD.
So really, it's a temple that has some of the most famous people from antiquity. It's a temple that's attached to a royal palace on the royal island of Antirodos, that was graced by Antony, Cleopatra, Augustus. It's a fascinating spot to be excavated, especially because it's all destroyed and then slid into the harbour, and is just there to be excavated. Excavated over the long term, excavated in a very careful and systematic way. And the results of that, which have come out about the changing use of the temple, especially as Egypt goes from being a Ptolemaic kingdom to part of the Roman Empire, and how the nature of the goddess changes over that time, I think is absolutely fascinating. You're about to publish these ideas, aren't you?
Yes, of course. It's not, the excavation is not finished, but I thought it will be important, and we discussed this together with OCMA, to have a monography on that, because it's so rich, I would say, in knowledge, in new knowledge, that it's important. It's a milestone, you know. And then after we go on excavation, and we will find new things, and we refine our knowledge of that sanctuary. But I think it's time to have a monography on that subject now.
Certainly, I mean that's one of the things that we're going to do in this mission that's coming up shortly, is to use our RTI scanner, so to scan lots of the small lead tokens that have been found on the site, so that we can try and get some more detail for the kind of the final publication of that.
Yes, I think those new technology are helping us quite efficiently in order to study all the materials, thousands of artifacts that we are finding on those sites, and enables also and make easy the study of those bulk of material.
So this use of new technology is seen in the work of one of our students, Leonie Hoff, who's been using 3D scanners to actually look at fingerprints that are embedded within the terracotta of the statuettes that she's looking at. And I find this a fascinating approach to it, because she's been able to show that that children have put the slabs of clay into the initial mold and have pressed it in, whereas adults have put the two molds together and finished off the statuette. And that gives you a really fascinating insight into how the production process works, how families may work together, and it's a real insight, I think, into the nature of production.
You were asking me before what surprised you, and this is one of the surprises I had, is that study can be made on field I even did not know it existed before. And this is one a good example of that. Of this is that yes, I had no idea that we could study the fingerprint and get some very interesting information about the manufacturing of those statuettes or those objects were done in the antiquity, who was doing them, what was the process of doing them, etc. Thus we go very, very deep into the knowledge even of artifact.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're sitting here just before the start of the next mission, and I was wondering what are your plans for the future in Egypt?
Yes, every year I have very well-defined plan, but it so happens that during excavation, each time we are coming across new element which divert sometime my prior planning. But planning in Alexandria will be to resume work on the sanctuary of Isis on the royal island of Enterodos, to further work on a new shipwreck that we have discovered in the small rural port of that island, and to further excavate also a very interesting site called the Timonium, which was the retreat of Antony at the end of its life with Cleopatra, standing close to the peninsula of the Poseidium, the temple of Poseidon, that we have discovered and that we are excavating for years, but it's a very difficult site to excavate. And making some tests maybe to identify new shipwrecks. This is for Alexandria, Portus Magnus, and in Tony-Seracheon we will work on underground structures that we could identify under the main temple of Amon-Gereb. We will start an excavation of what I suspect might be the temple of Mut. Mm-hmm. And we go on excavating one very interesting shipwreck of the 5th century BC. And we will also try to identify new shipwrecks thanks to my algorithm, which tell me you missed more than 50 shipwrecks. Please look there.
So that's really exciting. And at the same time, there will also be we'll also be in the storerooms in Alexandria, studying the material that has been excavated in previous years. So the people that are looking at the coins and the ceramics, Leone looking at the statuettes, and all of the other pieces of material culture. So at the same time as the excavations are going on, there's also a lot of work on the post-excavation.
Yes, we have built and organized with you a new storeroom because archaeological storeroom are very, very important for keeping very well the artifact, protecting them once they have been restored and waiting for studies or for exhibition. And there we have thousands of artifacts still to be studied. Thus, we have quite a lot of work ahead of us.
Quite a lot of work, yes. Well, I'm looking forward to going to the storerooms and to work with our colleagues in Egypt and our colleagues in the Institute.
And it's very, very interesting during those studies to have very well-known professors, you know, but students also starting from OCMA, and doing sometimes their first study after excavation there. And it's a kind of very interesting team that we have set up together there.
It's fascinating. Well, I look forward to seeing you on the boat, Frank. So thank you very much.
Waiting on the support vessel.